Welcome everyone. My name is Sean, and today we got to talk about this story out of the city of Chicago, and it's tragic on its surface. You guys might have seen the headlines. 11-year-old dies defending his pregnant mother from an attacker. You might have seen his image across the news, but unfortunately, as I've looked into the details of this particular case, it's actually significantly worse than I thought, because it's not only bad enough that an 11-year-old was put in that position that he lost his life, but it turns out it didn't need to be this way. This criminal was out on parole. He violated that parole, and the mother begged for him to be held in prison. It was just a month prior, yet they let him out. They sided with the criminal, and it ended up costing 11-year-old Jayden Perkins his life. And that's what we got to talk about today. So before we do, I want to thank everybody who signed up, actualjusticewarrior.com/join.
Give me the money. Give me the money. Okay.
And remind you, Saturday, Austin, Texas, Minds Fest. Link to tickets in the top of the description. And, of course, 20% off when you use promo code AJW.
Turning now to a tragic story out of Chicago, where an 11-year-old boy is dead after police say he was stabbed to death while trying to protect his pregnant mother.
So I've been combing over a bunch of different news segments related to this particular story. And by the way, my brother's the one who sent this to me. He said this is the exact kind of thing that you cover. Because when I saw the headline, I thought it was an isolated, not related to overall policy kind of story, and therefore not something that I was just going to cover just because it was horrific. But unfortunately, that's not the case. And unfortunately, despite what this local news person said,
Dina and Jewel, there was a press conference here moments ago that just wrapped up, and the superintendent, along with Kim Fox and the 40th Ward alderman, were all here, and over again they kept describing how this was a tragic event.
About this being a tragedy, it's not a tragedy. This was something that was instituted at the government levels in order to benefit the criminal, and the obvious consequences of these pro-criminal policies are what we're seeing right here, because they had the warning signs. They had everything they needed in order to prevent this from happening, but over and over again, the court system failed this mother and failed this young man. They failed this 11-year-old boy, and that's why he's dead. Not because of a natural disaster or some random tragedy like a car accident, because the parole board, the Cook County District Attorney, the state of Illinois, and the city of Chicago all prioritized the wants and desires of the criminal over this woman and over her family.
Now, this deadly attack happened on Wednesday, and police say that it was domestic related. Now, according to CPD, 37-year-old Crissetti Brand was taken into custody the same day of the attack. He is facing first-degree murder and attempted first-degree murder charges, along with other felonies. Police say Brand has an extensive criminal record, including home invasion and a history of domestic violence.
Look, I know I'm getting emotional about this particular story, and I probably shouldn't be, but the thing is, this local news segment is really getting under my skin. Like I said, it's not a tragedy, but more importantly, the way that they just described this, the way that they just described this man and his history is really grating on me, because it's not that he has a history of home invasion and a history of domestic violence. That sounds really neutral. That sounds like, you know what, maybe he got into an argument, lost control one day, stumbled into somebody's home, when that is not the case. This guy is a violent predator, a violent abuser, somebody who doesn't take no for an answer, somebody who attacks women, somebody who never lets women go, and by the way, he's proven out in his history that he's willing to hurt children in the process.
Police say he was released a day before Wednesday's attack and was out on parole. The state's attorney says a 33-year-old woman was in a previous relationship with Brand years ago.
Everything you needed to know was in his criminal history. Every single aspect that should allow an informed person on a parole board to make a decision on this man was all in the documents. It was all in the paperwork. They could have stopped this. So no, it's not just random domestic violence. Hey, maybe he shoved his cousin when they were in the house at one time. This guy is a brutal, violent thug, and it was only a matter of time before he killed somebody, and the only thing that would have prevented that was a violation of his parole, which should have happened. So Crissetti Brand, who of course was appealing his convictions because, you know, evil white racism sure must have been what was behind it, was initially convicted of aggravated domestic battery, very important right there, home invasion, and possession of a stolen converted motor vehicle. The trial court sentenced him to 16 years imprisonment for the home invasion, merged with the aggravated battery, and he was supposed to serve 3 years imprisonment for possession of the stolen or converted motor vehicle. However, that was concurrent. Now, there was also supposed to be an order of protection against Brand that would expire 2 years after the full completion of his sentence. So you might be wondering what happened in that particular case. case that the news was downplaying as just a random ordinary domestic incident. Well, let me break it down for you in the details of this from the appeal. So these are the details not alleged when he was initially charged that he was convicted of. These were the facts that came out at trial. So Shannon, who was the ex-girlfriend by the way, testified that the defendant was her ex-boyfriend and they had dated for about 2 years until she ended the relationship on October 3rd, 2015. On November 3rd, 2015, 4 days after she ended the relationship, the defendant went to her place of employment to speak with her, and Shannon told him she did not want to talk to him anymore. Later that evening at about 7:15, when Shannon was in her apartment preparing dinner for her 4 children, the defendant knocked at the door. She cracked open the door a little bit, told him that she had no interest in him, but then the defendant knocked on the door again. This time, after she said she wasn't interested, he kicked in the door. Now, of course, Brand, this guy that the state of Illinois, that the city of Chicago, was so desperate to give another chance, locked the door behind him, immediately pulled out a firearm, and pressed it up against the chin of his ex-girlfriend. This is the minor home invasion, the minor domestic violence. And remember, her 4 kids are in the house awaiting dinner when this man stormed in and is threatening to murder their mother. The defendant then grabbed Shannon, the mother, by the shirt collar and pushed her up against a wall next to the bathroom door and began choking her. Shannon's 15-year-old son, MB, stepped forward and asked the defendant what he was doing. Remember, his mother dated this man for 2 years, so this was somebody that he likely looked up to as a father figure. But Brand, of course, the classy guy that he actually is, pointed the gun at him and told him to get back. The defendant eventually dragged Shannon, the mother, into the 15-year-old's room, banged her head against the dresser, threw her on the ground, and then ran into Shannon's bedroom. Now, after he ran into the mother's bedroom, Shannon, she said that she actually heard keys jangling from that room, and then he ended up taking off and fleeing because after breaking into this home, after choking this woman in front of her 15-year-old son, who he pointed a firearm at, he decided that he was going to conclude his evening by stealing her car, because that's just the kind of guy Brand is. That's the excellent guy that the parole board looked at and they said, you know what? You need a second chance. Aren't you such a swell individual? Honestly, like, what would our society be without scumbags like you who beat on women and do all of these things getting a second chance at life? So even though he was sentenced to only 16 years for this, as is common practice, he served a little bit over half of it when he was eligible for parole, and his parole was granted. That's why a 16-year sentence in a crime he committed in 2015 resulted in his release. Now look, I'm linking the full appeal where you can read over the case details all you want to your heart's content, but the point I want you to take away from this is that this is a man with a history of domestic violence, serious domestic violence, aggravated domestic violence to be technical, where he would assault women in front of their kids, even a kid he had a 2-year relationship with, and then when the kid decided to step up, he would threaten said kid with a deadly weapon. So they parole him, and look, this happens. If this was the story on its own, I would not be so angry. I would not be so frustrated. But what happened after his initial parole, because yes, he was paroled twice, I find to be incredibly troubling.
Now to breaking news involving a horrific crime in Edgewater.
11-year-old Jayden Perkins was stabbed to death. His mom, who was pregnant, was seriously injured, and we are learning she begged authorities for help before the attack.
CBS 2 has been combing through court records of the prime suspect and learned that mother alerted the justice system about threats even while the suspect was behind bars.
So when Brand ended up getting out of prison after his 9-year bid, he ended up being arrested shortly after that for a parole violation, which of course was breaking into the very same pregnant woman's house and trying to attack her, the one where ultimately the 11-year-old ended up dying. But the thing is, that break-in was before that because the kid was killed in March. So what ended up happening was his parole was violated. He was sent back to prison. You are supposed to serve out the rest of your sentence when parole is violated. However, like in many progressive utopias across this country, parole violations for ticky-tack reasons, like the exact same crime that you committed, the serious ongoing danger that you are in society, are no big deal, and honestly, the product of evil white racism, because the take takeaway from the city of Chicago, from the Cook County, from the parole board appears to be that Brand is the victim, that he was the victim of society, and honestly, the system was really harsh on this repeat offender who repeatedly committed crime against women and, of course, was violent and threatening violence against children.
Joe and Erica, an emergency order of protection was denied. This pregnant woman, now fighting for her life in the hospital, warned a judge she could be attacked, and she feared for her life. This week, the woman's worries came true when a man we are not naming as we await charges came to her Edgewater apartment and stabbed her and killed her 11-year-old son.
Now, if you're a pregnant woman and a man who just got out of prison ends up breaking into your home and trying to attack you, is threatening you and all of that, then you do what society tells you you should do and what should work. And you figure, in a left-wing city where they want to protect women, they're probably going to protect you. They'll probably do something. And that's exactly what the mother in this situation did. She decided that she was going to petition the court for an emergency restraining order based on the idea that they might actually let this guy, even though he's out on parole when he committed the crime and he should be sent back to prison, out again. Then you end up trying to contact the Illinois Prisoner Review Board, which are the institutions that decide whether or not this guy is going to be released. You send out messages to the Cook County prosecutor. You contact everyone you need to contact in order to protect yourself, only to discover that those people care more about the criminal than they do about you or your son, and it ends up leading to tragic results. So that emergency restraining order, obviously, it should have been granted. It was denied.
Court records obtained exclusively by CBS2 revealed on the day of the murder and stabbing, the mother and suspect were scheduled to step before a judge at 10:30 Wednesday morning. Keep in mind, the crime happened just 2 hours before that court appearance.
In fact, tragically, her son was actually murdered 2 hours before the face-to-face non-emergency restraining order hearing was set to happen. It was supposed to be at 10:30. He showed up at 8 in the morning and killed her. So they denied the restraining order. The Prisoner Review Board says that they received no information at all whatsoever about the fact that he attacked this woman as soon as he was given parole the first time, that he was sending her threatening messages, that she was terrified of him, that he was willing to do this to her kids or while her kids were there. So they just rubber stamped his release, and the Cook County prosecutor couldn't be bothered to move fast enough to charge him in that other parole violation case. Couldn't be bothered to say, you know what, this guy, repeat offender, this guy, violent history, maybe we should do something about that. Maybe we should investigate. Maybe we should make this a priority. We got other things to do in Chicago. We got to talk about defunding the police. We can't do that if I'm Kimberly Fox.
The ex-girlfriend told me over the phone he contacted her the week he was released back in October 2023. She immediately called the parole board. Yet in the Edgewater stabbing, despite the pregnant mother telling the court she received threatening messages through text and feared for her life, this man was able to get to her and her family.
Now look, the parole board is playing games. They're talking about how, they weren't given the information. Their investigators didn't inform them of this or that. But the thing is, they didn't need the additional information. You shouldn't have needed to know that the mother was filing a restraining order. All you needed to know was that this guy was paroled 9 years into a 16-year bid for the crime of breaking into a woman's apartment, attacking her with a deadly weapon, with her son there, who he also threatened to kill in that previous instance, and then he was rearrested after you paroled him for, guess what, breaking into a woman's house, who, of course, had children there, and he was threatening her and all that. They had everything they needed to know, regardless of this woman wanting a restraining order. And by the way, you should kind of assume that if this woman didn't file for a restraining order, she must not have known about that, because nobody in their right mind wouldn't want a restraining order against this individual. But they rubber stamped his release again, and they're blaming everyone else.
Outrage over why Brand was free.
The defendant has a history of domestic violence and had only been recently released from serving a sentence from a prior conviction. The victim had an order of protection against him from previous encounters, and this history paints a disturbing pattern of behavior.
Watching these clips, these press conferences and all that is really aggravating me. It's really getting under my skin, because who do we see at these press conferences? The very same politicians, the very same people who tilted the criminal justice system in favor of the criminal rather than the victim. We see people like Kimberly Fox, Brandon Johnson, these woke representatives from this particular district that voted to defund the police, that voted to soften the parole system. all of these people are coming together to condemn the miscommunication, when in reality, it's the actual enforcement of the policies that they advocated for that led to this outcome. And let us not forget what this outcome is. A pregnant woman and her unborn child are still in the hospital. The status of both of them currently unknown. Multiple stab wounds against them. This 11-year-old, Jayden Perkins, who was put in a situation that a child should never be put in. And by the way, as somebody who didn't have to deal with domestic violence or anything like that growing up around this kid's age range of 11, I did have to deal with a crazy neighbor that was very antagonistic to my mother, and I know what it's like to be in that situation where you're thinking as a kid that you might have to fight an adult man. And that is a scary situation. And this kid not only had to fight an adult man, but he had to fight him in deadly combat. Like, he had to fight for his life and his mother's life, and that's how he died. And when I think about the number of stab wounds, when I think about how preventable this is, it's enraging. It should be enraging.
Here's a look at that alleged pattern. Brand was released in October 2023 after serving 8 years of a 16-year sentence for home invasion and other crimes, including the domestic abuse of another woman. At the time, state officials say he was reminded of the order of protection against him filed in 2005 by Jayden's mother. 3 months after his release, Jayden's mother alleges in a court filing that Brand sent her a threatening text message. 2 days later, that same court filing alleges he went to her and Jayden's home and tried to open the door. Details Jayden's mother put in her request for a new order of protection soon after, writing, Brand, quote, sent me several text messages saying he would kill me and my family. He would wait outside my house and shoot me. Prosecutors say Brand was taken back into custody for violating his parole, only to be released again a few weeks later on March 12th, 1 day before the deadly attack.
If this mother recovers, if her unborn child makes it through this unscathed, no matter what, she's gonna know for the rest of her life that her son, who should be right there with her, died defending her at age 11, and it never should have gotten to that point. She's gonna know that she went through all the proper channels. She talked to everybody she needed to talk to. She asked for relief from the institutions that are supposed to protect her, and instead, they protected the criminal. So yeah, they're gonna charge him. They're gonna give this dirtbag life in prison without the possibility of parole. Hopefully that's what he'll get. He's not going to plead down to some lesser charge like in the previous case, but that's not going to bring Jayden Perkins back to life. That's not going to make this family whole. And unfortunately, Cook County has basically set up a system where even when you do the exact same thing, but you don't kill someone, there are no consequences. So this is the only thing that they seem to understand. This is the only thing that they seem to want to address. Violence to the degree where a child was murdered, stabbed multiple times, is the only thing that's like, okay, maybe, just maybe, the criminal justice system could work.
This gentleman was paroled after being sent back to prison in February for violating parole and violating a protective order is utterly beyond me, but it absolutely could be prevented. In this case, I think the parole board has to be held accountable.
Look, I don't really have any profound thoughts or like questions to get you guys to like leave comments or whatever. All I can say is that Jayden Perkins should be alive, and he's not alive because of the representatives in the city of Chicago, in the state of Illinois. And while I could repeat that for hours, I gotta end the video here. As usual, you guys know what to do. Leave your comments. I'll try to go through them. If there's any way to help the family or something, I don't know what could help them, then I'll link it in the description. I haven't found anything. I'm just going to close with this. 11-year-old Jayden Perkins was an absolute hero in this situation, but he shouldn't have needed to be. Till next time.